So next item, we had an item on here, Member Armino Pruitt, regarding access to investigation files, where you suggested and brought this up, suggested at the last meeting that we look into this. You also brought this up at our policy and procedures subcommittee meeting, and I wasn't sure of how you wanted to proceed with this, so I put it on the agenda, and I would leave it to you to tell us, instruct us how you want to proceed with this.
Thank you, Dr. Cass. So when I look at our board policies and procedures document, I guess, I know you said to please bring some verbiage, and but what I'm looking at doesn't look like it. Like, I guess I want some clarity on what exists, because it says in the section on board access to investigation materials, there's the board shall have reasonable access to the following documents and information. A, redacted personnel records for APD personnel, including those of the Internal Affairs Unit, shall be made available to the board on demand. And then B, information that could be construed to be covered by Garrity will be made available to the board on applications submitted in writing pursuant to a majority vote of the board. And then the next section is about the confidentiality that should be maintained for any Garrity materials. So that was why I asked Ms. Van Meter earlier about what constitutes Garrity materials, because my understanding from the reason this came up was because Member Nixon had inquired about being able to see some OBRD footage from a case, and was told that we'd have to have a vote on it at the next meeting to allow it, and then that would mean it would be another month before the vote on the case. I guess that case would be, held over, tabled until the next meeting. And so I thought we should have a discussion about what materials we're allowed to have with and without a vote, and how I don't understand Garrity. My when I look it up, it basically is the way Ms. Van Meter described it, was that it's sort of a compelled testimony, so that it can't be, you can't have access to it without some restrictions. So I'm wondering how that compares to other, like when we do our audits, we're allowed to have OBRD. We're not voting unless that vote was included in the procedure that we created, the policy around the audit committee. So what do we have to do if we want more materials, and can we codify that in a way that makes sense to all members, current and future?
Okay, Director Harness, would you care to respond, please? Can you shed some light?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt. In your first statement, where you're referencing the policies and procedures, and you're referencing files, those are internal affairs files, I believe is what they're referring to, which are under the control of APD. Garrity materials, to boil it down, those are the statements that the officers give us as a part of the investigation. Those are compelled statements because they are a condition of employment. They must cooperate with us, so therefore they have to give us a statement. But those statements then are confidential. Early on, when this board was formed, your counsel at the time, Mr. Baker, and the APOA negotiated what is in the ordinance now for access to the Garrity materials. So you'll note whenever you review a file from the CPOA in the audit function, it does not include officer statements because that's Garrity material, which is protected by confidentiality. However, the board can vote to review those materials, and then there's access that will be granted to those materials at APD. I think beyond that, the policies are pretty straightforward. Once there's been a completed investigation and a recommendation comes before you, you have 3 steps you can take. You can accept the recommendation. You can come up with your own recommendation based upon a review of the investigative file, or you can send it back for more investigation. Beyond that, when an investigation is completed from the CPOA, you can vote to have access to the file to review it.
Okay, did you not just say that we could, one of the 3 options was that we could access the investigative file and offer an alternative, right?
Mm-hmm,
So
yes.
in that case, how is that not what was done and requested and refused previously? Did we not have a case in front of us? A member said, I'd like to see the OBRD, and was told you'd have to vote on it at the next meeting.
Yep, you have to vote as a board.
For OBRD. For OBRD.
No, for access to the investigation file.
Okay, so what can we ask? So if we've got a case in front of us and we're curious, because what we're asked to do basically is we're given the complaint letter and we're given the findings letter. And so then if before we're voting on the appropriateness of the finding, and we want to look at some information about the case, what is our avenue there? What is available to us at that point?
You can make a motion to...
Without the vote. I'm just asking, in that case, before the vote, we have access to only those 2 pieces of information only.
That's correct.
Okay. So what would we need to do then? Where in our policies and procedures would we need to? Because I don't see anything that addresses this in our policies and procedures unless I'm missing it, and that's entirely possible. But where would we need to change something if the will of the board is to change it? Is it in the section that I read? Or is there another section that addresses this?
Chair Dr. Cass, member Armio Pruitt, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Are you asking for individuals to independently decide that they want to review an investigative file?
I'm asking for any board member or all board members for the materials to be made available upon request from the agency when we have cases before us. So if something sounds, raises a lot of questions for us in the process when we're looking at the complaint letter versus the response, can we just change our policies and the result be that a board member can say, can the OBRD for this case be made available to all board members without a board vote?
No.
Okay, so I feel like last time in this meeting when I asked this question, I was told, yeah, rewrite the policy and bring it back to us and we'll talk about it. Was I not told that?
Chair Dr. Cass, member Armio Pruitt, what I'm saying is that you can't act independently. You as a board have to decide that you want to review aspects of an investigation.
I'm asking, can we change our policies to allow for a member to request that any board member be allowed access to OBRD upon request? I don't think you can. You have to operate as a board. You're a body. Okay, as it is now, things are made available to us at different times and not everybody looks at them and we all come together and discuss them. So if it's made available to all and it's up to each individual to decide if they're going to look at that, how is that acting individually?
Chair Dr. Cass, member Armio Pruitt, whatever board decides to do as an individual behavior to review something or to not to review something, that's one thing. But there was a predicate vote by the board to review those materials. That's the point.
You're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted.
Sorry. Is having it on an agenda where we're all in agreement that the case under review is under review by the whole board, isn't that an agreement in and of itself that we're reviewing that case?
Your Chair, Dr. Cass, member Armio Pruitt, you're reviewing what's being presented to you as part of the agenda, but the policies and procedures, which are from the ordinance, state what your rights are or how you are to handle the completed investigation.
Okay, so can you help me find them in the policies and procedures that address this? Because like I said, it says we can request personnel files that will be redacted. We can vote to request Garrity materials, and then we have to keep Garrity materials confidential. Those are the 3 points, A, B, and C, that I found there under investigative materials. And like I said, there may be another section that's appropriate and addresses all of this, but I don't know what it is. And so it doesn't, I'm sorry, it looks like Ms. Gooch has some input here.
Yes, Ms. Gooch, I would, yes. And then we'll get to board member questions and comments after we hear from council.
I did not mean to interrupt you, Member Armijo Pruitt. I'm sorry. And thank you, Chair Dr. Cass. In answer to, I think, one of Member Armijo Pruitt's overarching questions, in your policies and procedures on page 14, which is a different section than what you and Director Harness have been talking about, there is a provision that talks about access to APD documents, and that is different than the confidential documents in the other investigations section that addresses Garrity. So that provision allows for reasonable access for the board and the agency and Director Harness upon reasonable notice. But the overlay, I think that what Director Harness is talking about is how the board gets to that point where it's wanting to review those additional documents. And where that part of it is what Director Harness has laid out, which is when a case comes before the board, you have the recommendations. And if you have those questions or you want to see something more, the board then is empowered to take a vote to ask for that additional information before voting on the final recommendation. But it is not thought of in your policies to be an individual process for board members to take prior to that review in front of the whole board on the policies and recommendations. I hope that answers the questions about what you get to see and when you get to see it. The other items you're talking about that are not subject to Garrity, they don't have the same confidentiality requirements associated, but we still want to act as a board and make sure that there's no independent investigation going on by board members. There's a provision. Let me find the section. So the board review provisions start on page 16 of your policies and procedures. And what it says is that, and it's basically what Director Harness has laid out, which is that the board should review the findings and recommendations at a properly noticed meeting, and that for that review, there's 3 requirements of the board. One is to remain impartial and abstain from any independent investigation or review of information not presented by the investigation report or within the investigation file. 2, refrain from ex parte communications with anyone involved in the case. And 3, refrain from prejudgment of the complaint before it's heard by the board. After that process happens, the board can then approve the findings, approve other findings as supported by the investigation file, defer the matter to allow for further investigation or analysis, and then a couple others regarding editing, proofreading, and ask that the findings be returned. And I think where your question's coming from, Member Armijo Pruitt, is what is included in the investigation file.
Right.
And what is that? And I would say that I don't know. I think that Director Harness is the expert when it comes to what is part of the findings and recommendations and what is part of the investigation file and what is not.
Because the way I'm reading what you just, thank you, Ms. Gooch, very much for that. I appreciate the redirection on where to find that. So reading that now, though, it does make me wonder, remain impartial in deliberations and decisions and abstain from any independent investigation or review of information not presented by the investigative report or within the investigation file. So the way I read that, and maybe I'm incorrect, is if it's in the investigation file, we can review it. Is that not what it says?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, no one's disputing that. I'm simply saying that you have to do it as a board vote. You can't send me an email demanding portions of an investigation file as an independent board member. You need to act as one. That's my only point.
But if it's made available to all, we are acting as one. That is available to all members to review. If it's a standing thing, and I don't see where it says we cannot, like that process, is that like a working process, or is it enshrined in here somewhere, like specifically that a board vote is required?
So while you're contemplating that, I'll let you draw a breath, and I'll recognize Member Galloway, who's had her hand up for a while. Member Galloway.
Could we not put an end to this by simply having a vote that says the board approves of a member's request for bits and pieces of the investigative file? I mean, it should be open with the agency and available, and I suspect it wouldn't be horribly problematic because it's there. It's just an email click away, I would think, as opposed to being submitted to APD already and then having to track it down after the fact. And I think it would sure make us a lot more efficient and effective at reviewing cases as mandated if we could have the information needed to do it.
Chair Cass, Member Galloway, on what information would that request be based? But for the completed investigation with the recommendation, how are you going to know what's in an investigation file, and how are you going to know what you want to look at prior to the completed investigation coming before you with the recommendation?
But when the completed investigation comes before us and we're presented with a findings letter and a complaint, the findings letter sometimes, not always, but sometimes lists out what pieces of information were used in the investigation. And sometimes when we're reading through a complaint, in fact, fairly often, we have questions that could be answered by review of an OBRD or a police report or whatever piece of the file that's available. And if the board were to act tonight or next month or whenever and say, we want members to have this information made available to them upon request, it would be probably so that there's a record of it. A request should be made via email. But other than that, I guess I don't know what problem exists.
Chair Cass, Member Galloway, you already have that power in your policies and procedures when it comes before you for a vote.
But if we can do it tonight for all future cases and not have to do it the night of a vote every single time, it's much more efficient, much more expedient.
That's not.
And it doesn't say we have it doesn't say we need a vote in these procedures, though. This policy, the board policies and procedures.
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you had to say, Director Harness.
So I'm gonna recognize.
I'm sorry. I would like to hear what Director Harness's response was before we move to another individual.
You've asked your question. I'm gonna recognize Member Olivas now.
So we're not getting a really direct answer here on this as far as why we would even need a vote on this. Now, I understand with regards to Garrity materials, with anything that's housed at APD, that we would need a vote, and I understand why. I don't think anybody's talking about that. That's not what we're referring to here. We understand that process, and we're working within that process. So the policies and procedures don't say anything that specifically restricts this. It seems like there's just some resistance to making this available, and I guess I see the point here being that we don't want to encourage individual members to spend large amounts of time reinvestigating complaints, particularly in the context of the audit that our board is also doing. But at the same time, it's not in the interest of efficiency of the agency or of the board to require a vote, which wouldn't be properly noticed at the meeting where it was needed. So that would mean you'd have to wait till the next meeting to properly notice it. And then so that means the case that you were trying to hear may be delayed 3 months to ask for a report or some footage. And I mean, I'm not sure I agree with this logic that there's anything that prohibits members from asking for that at the time they want to see it. But I think if we're going to proceed down that road, maybe a compromise here is to just have this item on the agenda at every meeting going forward. And that way it's always there, it's always noticed. And then if we want to request materials on a case that we're interested in hearing more about, then it's there. I don't really buy that that's necessary, but yeah.
So I'd like to ask a question. How does this impact the language that says that cautions against individual board members conducting their own investigation, which seems to me to be relevant language here. And what's the intent of this, of restricting access to investigative files, and whatever, to the extent that they're restricted, if it's not for that purpose? I'm curious as to, so I'm directing that to, yes, Director Harness, please.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Olivas, I'll make 2 points. You are a deliberative body to evaluate evidence as a body and not as individuals. So you're a deliberative body to evaluate. You are a board. You are not acting as individuals. Secondly, the blanket permission, as you're proposing it, would no way meet the specificity as outlined under the OMA for an action. I guess I'm really struggling with the fact that it's already in your policies and procedures. If you have a case that you want to review the file, you can vote to do so when it's on the agenda.
Member O'Neill.
Well, I would argue that that's germane to what's on the agenda, because if those cases are on the agenda, that's a germane item that you may have a request related to those cases. I don't think that falls.
Exactly, and then you can vote to review the file.
Yes, but currently your suggestion is that we have to wait an additional month to properly notice that request, and then no. So you're saying we can vote tonight to request on what we have tonight?
Yes.
Okay.
So, Member O'Neill.
Where in our policies and procedures does it lay out that if we want part of the investigative file, we need to vote on it as a board to request that?
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt. You are a board. I don't know how else to say it more fundamentally, that you are a board and you must vote to take action.
Yes, Member Armijo Pruitt.
We do not vote to see the complaint. We do not vote to see the findings letter, because those are made available to all of us to review. And some people may choose to review all of them, and some people may not, because I've certainly been on here where people have not looked at some of these things, right? So then we are all having access to that information, and then we are voting as a board. We're discussing as a board the issues that we see. This is not an independent action. It's being informed within the scope of our procedures. So what I'm asking for is, you just said that within our policies and procedures, it lays out the process for doing this appropriately with a board vote. And I'm asking where that is.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, Attorney Gooch just reviewed those provisions with me.
She did, and it didn't say that there was a vote needed. That's my point. I just read board review B. She read out loud. I reiterated it. Remain impartial in deliberations and decisions, and abstain from any independent investigation or review of information not presented by the investigation report or within the investigation file. An independent investigation in this case would be going outside of what is put together by the agency. That's what it reads to me. It's saying that you are not to go outside of that information. But that information isn't being made available to us without coming together to have a board vote on the evening where we're supposed to discuss these things. And then, because we see the agenda is set and posted, right? And then we get access to the 2 pieces of information on SharePoint. And then we'd have to come together and say, oh, by the way, instead of voting on this, let's table this one, because I would like for us to vote that we all be able to see the OBRD on this. And then the next month, we would then have access to that OBRD and we could vote on that case. To me, it feels like it's unnecessarily extending the timelines on these where we already have a problem on timelines. And I do not see, this seems very explicit to me, this B1 under board review. 6B1 seems like it's saying we have access to the investigation report and the investigation file as part of our review.
Okay, I'll let you draw another breath and I'll recognize Member Mitchell.
Well, I didn't have my hand up, but
somebody told me you did.
Nice.
If you didn't have your hand up, then I'll go somewhere else.
I'm all for shutting up, believe me. I kind of agree. I think that once the documents are presented to us to vote on, that if we want additional information as an individual board member, we should just be able to go back to the agency and say, this isn't clear to me. Can I see this document, or can I see this video without delaying the discussion? I don't really see why that's a problem, and I don't see that as doing an independent investigation, because you're really discussing information that's already been presented for consideration. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm going to recognize Councilor Gooch, and I'll ask if she can add to this discussion or repeat what she said, or bring anything more to bear.
Thank you, Chair Dr. Cass. I will point out, to the extent it matters, that the ordinance 9-4-1-8 is where your policies and procedures are coming from. They are a cut and paste of the ordinance provisions in the current version, and that the ordinance includes the not presented by the investigation report or within the investigation file language. It further goes on in the ordinance, which also matches your policies and procedures. Section E of the ordinance provides that after the board has completed its review, it shall, by a majority of members present, 1, approve the findings and recommendations. 2, and this is kind of pertinent to the discussion, approve other findings and recommendations as determined by the board and supported by the investigation file. Then it says 3, defer action on the matter to allow for further investigation or analysis as specifically identifiable matters by the director. And then it adds, as part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board. I don't know in the ordinance if we're putting the chicken before the egg here, where it says after the board has completed its review, we have these 3 options. And then after they list the 3 options in the ordinance, it then says, as part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board. It's all there in the ordinance. And then when it was brought into our policies and procedures, I just have to flip back and let me see if that made it there. And it does. On page 16 of our policies, it says the full investigation file shall be available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below. And that's where the Garrity materials come in. So when you look at the ordinance and you look at the policies, I think that the practice may be exactly what Director Harness has set forth with what the agency has done. But if the board thinks that this should be interpreted differently, that the investigation file as well as the findings are to be provided to the board for its initial review, I think the ordinance could be read to support that as well. I hope that doesn't add more murkiness to the discussion.
And I recognize Member Nixon.
It doesn't. It actually clears it up. And I'll be honest with you, I don't see how we can, as a board even, or individuals, or however you want to call it, can say we're doing an investigation when the very people that we're investigating are providing the materials for us, but so be it. Those are the only materials we have at hand. But it doesn't make sense to me that I don't have Garrity materials to look at, to make assessments and make analysis of, and that's not going to be something that would be provided unless we go to a vote after the fact. So to Member Armijo Pruitt's point, and the point of getting this done is, if we need to make a change to our policies and procedures, I'm all for it. But I think that also, if we're going to go forward and do this kind of work, that we need to have all the materials so that we can make the accurate and necessary assessments. And I don't think that not having access to the Garrity materials, or having them quote unquote after the fact, would be the most effective way to investigate. So help me out here. I mean, what do we need to do to change this so that we can get the Garrity materials, or whatever materials we need to do for an investigation, an accurate investigation, in a timely manner? And if that means changing our policies and procedures, so be it. But since, and correct me if I'm wrong, Member Armijo Pruitt, but there may have been some sort of motion that you were going to come up with for us to vote on to kind of go down that line. I'm all for it, because we need to change something. It's not acceptable to continue doing investigations the way we're doing it. We don't have enough of the information. How do we get that?
Well, Chair Dr. Cass and Member Nixon, let's be clear. The board's not doing investigations. You're right. You're reviewing.
You're right. Analysis.
You're reviewing the work of the agency.
You're so right.
Okay,
I meant analysis.
Let's be clear about that, and let's make that distinction.
Agreed.
Because you're not doing investigations. You're not interviewing people. You're not doing investigations. You're reviewing.
I disagree with you.
He misspoke.
I don't have any argument with what you're saying.
Okay, so let's make that distinction first off.
Thanks.
Secondly, if you want access to Garrity material blanketly, as you're proposing, then you need to go back and negotiate that and change the ordinance and negotiate that with the APOA, because that was how that came about. So Garrity materials, if you want to go down that road and fight that battle, okay, then that will have to be a negotiation between your council and the APOA and the city council to change the ordinance. Beyond that, I think let's focus on the operative word, the board. Not board member, it's the board. And the concept that I can't get beyond is that you have to act as a body. And so are you saying that for every investigation, we must automatically make the entire investigation file available? Is that what you're going at?
Honestly, my preference, yes, would be exactly that when we go to SharePoint and we look up, CPC 19, whatever, that, yeah, all the materials there and anybody can look at them within the board, and then they are fodder for discussion and decision-making at the board meeting. That would be my first choice. And should that not be the will of the board, then an alternative would be that upon request, they're made available. And if any one board member requests them, they're made available on SharePoint for all board members to access. I think we do need to have some wording around this in our policies and procedures document, even though personally, I don't feel like there's anything here excluding us right now from already having that be, we're not restricted from what I can see here from having these things made available to everyone. Is the complaint or the concern on your part, Director Harness, does it have to do with agency time? Because this isn't about individual members. This is about board members being informed enough to play their appropriate role as part of a whole board in making decisions. And so I would not advocate for anyone to do any personal investigating of anything, but reviewing the investigative file is a different thing entirely. So, I mean, my request my wish list would be that every one of the cases that we look at on SharePoint has the file there so that we can look at the police report and we can look at OBRD at will.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt. So let's just go back a couple of months and let's look at how case review decided that they thought they didn't want to be in the position of where they're reviewing individual cases because it was too burdensome. So it wasn't.
That was not
doable. Please.
Okay.
Because you didn't want to be in the position of doing investigations and reviewing investigations.
No.
Now, the board is supposed to spend a majority of its time on policy. And so you're wanting to dive into these individual investigations, yet there's been no discussion of what happened at the amici meeting with APD, which is the body that you're to be overseeing. You have professionals in the CPOA that do investigations and do work. The board has not considered, has not talked about, has not reviewed anything that happened at the compliance meeting with the department, which are
none of that is what we're talking about right now, Director Harness. So stop smoke and mirroring it.
No, and stop interrupting
out lying about what happened.
I am not. Oh, okay.
You are.
I'm a liar.
The CRC did not do that.
Member Galloway,
I'm sorry, Dr. Cass. You have
Member Galloway, you don't have the floor. Member Galloway, you don't have the floor.
Dr. Cass,
Member
that is
Galloway,
because you refuse to acknowledge that I am a member of this board.
I'm
and there are several people who have watched you ignore me.
And I've recognized board members as I find them able to be recognized. So
if you choose to, admittedly,
at the moment you do not have the floor. So continue, member Armijo Pruitt.
Okay, so the characterization that the CRC did not want to review, it was too burdensome to review individual cases, is an inaccuracy. I do believe I started that conversation that led to the change into an audit process by talking about the redundancy of our efforts for the whole board versus the committee itself. So there was never a discussion that I was a part of for CRC. Maybe you're invoking something that's before my time, which sometimes seems to happen when you invoke something before my time, and then there's never any follow-up on what that actually means. But in my experience on that committee, that was never been the complaint. That is not why the committee switched to a different modality, and which in fact was to switch to be more in depth in looking at cases, right? That audit process is much more than what we're talking about it doing previously. And then this idea that we're trying to do the job of the agency by doing what is clearly put in this and the ordinance is within our realm to do. It does feel to me like originally I was told, in fact, I know it was told to me by you, that we would have access to materials in order to assess the review process, the investigative process, right? That we're supposed to assess the investigations. We're supposed to vote on the findings of the investigations. And you wanted to hobble us and have us do that with complaints and with findings letters, that we can't comment on the findings letters format because that's micromanaging. And if we ask for information, it's all kicked down the line. I brought this up last month, was told that we couldn't do this. You told me in the beginning of this discussion that we can't change these policies to do this. And then we look at them, and what it actually says is the investigative file is part of what we're allowed to review. So I feel like you're mischaracterizing what it is I'm proposing we do. I understand that we are a full board. I do not want to do anything as an individual. I'm not just looking to get my thrills looking at different cases. I'm looking to be fully informed. And mischaracterizing the history of this board or the committee feels like smoke and mirrors. And Dr. Cass, last month you did acknowledge explicitly that you had seen Member Galloway's hand raised and were choosing to ignore it.
I'm sorry, but if that's your characterization, that's not the way that's not what I intended.
That was verbatim what you said.
I've recognized you in as fair a way as I can do. I think it's incumbent on me to make sure that all board members have an opportunity to speak, and so I'm trying to assure that that's the case.
I think you and I can have a sideline conversation.
I still do have the floor, and I believe constant interruptions are a mode of operation that I'd like to change so that we do this in a more orderly fashion. And if it means having to wait longer than you'd like, then I'm sorry that's the way it's going to be. But if you have something to say, I'll recognize you now. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Cass, and you and I can finish that particular conversation on the side. Director Harness, the request for CRC to move to more of an audit function came from you. You asked for us to do that. The investigative staff asked for us to do that because there was an acknowledgement that the board was making findings based solely on complaints and finding letters and not looking at the investigative file. That was a problem. The solution to that, with the understanding that it was highly unlikely that the entirety of the board would even be bothered to look at the findings letter and the complaint, much less the full investigative file, was to move CRC to an audit function. We tailored that to your request and that of the agency. It was a part of that conversation where Dr. Cass and I were the only board members to show up to have the agency have the facilitated discussion with us. That was the genesis of CRC as an audit function. So coming to this body at this time and suggesting anything otherwise is an out and out fallacy.
Member Nixon.
Yeah, and I have a question for Member Armijo Pruitt. Based on Councilor Gooch's response and contribution to this conversation on the policies and procedures, I'm not seeing anything that takes away or negates us being able to vote on your intentions at this point on making the motion. And so can you clarify exactly what you want to vote on so that we can get on with it?
Yes. So I think where D reads, the full investigation file shall be available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, which references Garrity materials. That really tells us that, I mean, that feels like it's the permission we need. I think we should codify something here so that it's very explicit that we amend it to read either the full investigation file shall be made available upon request, or I guess I would rather go with the initial recommendation that Edward Harness asked if that's what we would like to do. I'm going to say the full investigation file shall be made available along with the findings letter and complaint letter to the board for its review. So that, I mean, we already know how we make those available. So.
And that'd be on SharePoint, just to clarify.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It won't fit on SharePoint.
Okay, in whatever mode. I wasn't planning on putting SharePoint in here,
Do
so.
we have clarification as to well, the logistics of how we access, how this would be accessed?
I assume it would be the same way we access them for the audit file, whatever that modality is. Right?
Yeah, that was.
Director Harness, please.
Chair, Dr. Cass, member me approved. Yes, that's Smart Link, and that's that's hours of work to upload those investigation files for your review. And
Thank you.
No, never mind.
So
You're on mute, Dr. Cass.
thank you. I'm trying to understand the distinction here. So for files which investigation files are within the control of the agency are there any investigation files within control of the agencies that are available to be put on the SharePoint?
Chair Dr. Cass, that would depend on the content of the investigation file. So video is not going to go on SharePoint. And for those two audit files, that was about a 5-hour process to get those up onto SmartLink for those 2 reviews. So it's smoke.
Let me interrupt you.
It is a very labor-intensive process, I'm
sorry. Let me interrupt you, and because I think you answered my question. So I'd like to be sure that this is understood. I mean, how does this affect what you're asking for, Member Armijo Pruitt? If it's necessary to put every investigative file that's of interest into uploaded into the separate link, which requires a great effort. I mean, and I accept that as the situation. Then does that have some impact? I mean, what we're asking for then is every case would be uploaded in this way, and it seems to me that we really have defeated the purpose of having the agency do these investigations, and we're really we're having to duplicate all this by putting the information into that other link. I mean, am I understanding the process correctly? That's what I'm after.
So I guess I'm wondering, so when you say it's a 5-hour process to get the videos uploaded, is that like 5 hours of really slow upload, or is that 5 hours of like staff members having to reach out and gather resources and, active, 5 hours of active time from an employee, or is it 5 hours of upload time?
Chair, Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt, it's the time to upload it from the X drive where it would be stored into SmartLink.
I see.
So, remember, our Council Gooch has a comment, which is, do they have to be uploaded, or why do they have to be uploaded? Can't board members visit the agency and view hard copies or watch video there? So would you answer that question, please?
Chair, Dr. Cass, the board is not going to be allowed access into the X drive because that's a city protected drive. So they would have to be put into SmartLink for the board to have access to them. And the board cannot have a user license into evidence.com.
Let's see, I'm Member Mitchell.
I don't support uploading all this information. I think it's labor intensive. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's necessary if an individual board member reads the finding and has additional questions, and maybe all they really want to see is the ORB or the OBR or whatever it's called. They don't care about the police report. They just want to see that piece of the work. That seems like that would narrow it down. And if that required going to the agency to actually look at it, I don't think that's honest, because I don't think it's going to be that often that's going to be a concern. Now, maybe other board members don't share that, but when I read the findings letters, they usually seem pretty definite to me in terms of how they arrived at their conclusion. And so they don't cause me to have a lot of need for additional information beyond that. But if I did have that, I think I should be able to go to the agency and see that information that would help me make my decision. And again, that may not require looking at every piece of information on the investigation. I would assume that includes interview synopsis of interviews, ORB, police reports. I think it's not reasonable, considering the workload the agency already has and the concerns we have about the time it takes to get an investigation to us, that we're trying to put on additional work on the agency that the majority of the board may not even want to look at. And it may just be a particular board member who has a concern. And again, I have no problem with that board member being able to see whatever they need to feel comfortable making their decision.
Member Galloway, you have your hand up, or is this an old hand? A permanent hand?
So I'm okay with bits and pieces. I think it would be more burdensome. The files, I imagine, have to be stored someplace, but I know I had an evidence.com login ID and password. I know I have that. I have vague recollections of you saying something fairly recently that doesn't happen anymore, but I'm curious as to why that doesn't happen anymore and if that can be undone.
Sure, Dr. Cass, Member Galloway, yes. For some reason, you were given a user license as opposed to public access. There are limited numbers of user licenses. So,
aren't OBRD IPRAable?
Yes, they are.
So, I mean, that seems like that would be burdensome to go in an IPRA request. Is that something, I mean, Tina or Ed, doesn't our policies or our ordinance or whatever say that information can be and will be made available to the board upon request from the city? Is that a collective bargaining thing that we can't have access to that, or is it because we haven't asked that we don't have access to that? What's the scoop there?
Chair Dr. Cass, Board Member Galloway, I think that it's a melding of two ideas in your question. And so the Garrity issues, let's just separate those. And to be really clear, the ordinance provides certain requirements that are in our policies and procedures about how the board gets access to Garrity materials. And that is separate from, let's just take that out of the discussion that we're having with the investigation file, because we don't want to, I don't want anyone on this board to be exposed to any kind of Garrity issues or a violation of the ordinance provisions. So taking that off the table, just talking about the investigation file. The ordinance says that the full investigation file shall be made available to the board. Your policies say that, but they also include the caveat that if there's Garrity materials, that's not part of what goes to the board. As far as APD policies, I believe that was page 14. Let me scroll back up. Access to APD documents, it says the city shall provide reasonable access to APD premises, files, documents, reports, and other materials for inspection by board members, CPOA investigative staff, and the executive director upon reasonable notice. I read that as reasonable notice to APD.
Sure.
So that you're not knocking on the door and demanding, 18 years worth of files and expecting them to be there for you. I think your question was what the notice requirement was for the board and its meetings.
It's particularly about OBRDs and access to the evidence.com site where OBRDs are housed. And if we can simply make a request of APD that OBRD videos, because I'm pretty sure they were it's been a while since I logged into that, but I'm pretty sure they were able to filter those out, that we could make a request for a certain batch of cases and have access to those videos through an evidence.com login.
Yes, but they were only separated by association with a particular case.
But that's what I'm asking for.
But we've already pulled them. We already have them as a part of the investigation file. So why do you need to go to evidence.com to get them?
Because you are telling us that it is too burdensome to make those videos available to us. And so the solution I'm trying to arrive at is for us to go and get them. Go to evidence.com and get them, so that you guys don't have to spend those hours. And then it's just a matter of paper. And that shouldn't take an eternity to upload to SharePoint or whatever system you would like to use. If we go and do the legwork to obtain the videos that we want to see, if we can make that a reality, then it shouldn't be so burdensome to the agency.
And how does the board determine which videos they want to see, but by having a vote? on a
I
particular
would
day.
say that we would, at this point, just say, going forward, as a part of this policy and procedure amendment that we're going to do, that one of the things that you will do, or whoever you deem appropriate, would say to APD, houser, keeper, guardian of the OBRD videos, that we would like to have access to CPC or investigation, whatever the number is that APD has. We would like access to these this month. Thanks. And then those would be the ones that we would see. And it just be part of the, I mean, you talk back and forth to them all the time, don't you?
And again, I ask, how do you determine that without voting on it as a board?
I would say we would do that now.
So you're going to say that you are going to, as a board, vote to carte blanche say that you want access to any video associated with any civilian complaint that may come before the board between now and what, 2020?
Eternity?
2023?
Between now and eternity. Yeah.
I think that's an unfathomable standard.
Why? I guess I'm confused as to why, because you're already pulling these videos. You already know what videos we should be looking at because you and your investigators are already looking at them. You have a record of them. Each video is assigned a number. You already have a record of that. It would be a copy and paste and say, hey, I would like access for my board to have these videos. It doesn't, I must be missing something fundamental.
The board vote on an individual.
I would say we would hold that tonight.
No, on an individual case.
And we're saying we don't have to have that. The only problem that we're trying to solve now is your ability and capacity to provide the board with that information. I'm taking that out of your hands and saying we will go and fetch what we want to see. You provide us with a scan of the file and be done with it.
I'll recognize Member Olivas. He's had his hand up for a long time.
I really don't think that we're getting anywhere on this. I think we need to call a vote if we're going to vote. And, you know, this is a really tricky subject. I do understand where the agency's coming from, where the director's coming from. This needs to not be a burden on them. But I also have to say it shouldn't be a burden on us either. So I think this is something that we've got to come up with a solution here that accommodates everyone. But I think at this point, we're just talking in circles and people are entrenched in their various positions. And I understand why. But I think we've got to come up with some sort of a plan. And I think it has to be acknowledged by the director and the agency that this is something that we need to work together on. No is not an acceptable answer. We need to we need a partnership here. We need some help to help the board figure out how we can do this to make it efficient for the agency and efficient for the board. And we're not really getting there right now. So, you know, I don't know where this is going, but I think that we need to wrap this up. We need to call a vote if we're going to vote, or you know. But I'm still not clear what the vote is even on. So, or what is there even a motion here? So, where are we going with this?
I recognize the chair recognizes a member Armijo Pruitt.
Thank you. Okay, so I present this motion that where it reads on page 16D, I would propose that we amend it to read, as part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, along with the proposed findings and recommendations. And then how we make that happen, whether it's evidence.com, whether it is coming in and picking up a thumb drive with the information on it. I don't know, but I think that in this day and age with technology, it seems like we're all pretty capable of sort of figuring this out. So I'm going to put it right here in the chat box. If I can find it. Where's the button to push? Okay. I think that went to everyone.
So I would like, while this motion is pending, I'll make it pending for a second. Would another approach be to look to create another special ad hoc committee to look at a process for doing this before we decide what it is? I mean, given that we have an idea of what you propose, an idea for what we want to do, would it not be better to start by looking at the process that would be involved in doing this in order to, come back and have something to work with rather than speculate that it can be done? All right, go ahead. I was a comment on your direct.
So I don't know how we are going to solve this problem. It's got to be Ed working with city IT or whatever in his office to figure out how best to do this. But there are so many options. Technology is just not that. It's not that big of a barrier. I think if it's put it on a bunch of thumb drives and we go pick them up, or it's get the link made, or it's evidence.com. But I guarantee you the city of Albuquerque is capable of this. And the idea that it says right there, both in the ordinance and in our policies, that this is made available, this is part of our review, but we're being told no. So I think the first step is to put it in policy in an explicit way, in a more explicit way than it exists. And then we work moving forward on how to make that happen. But that the expectation is that the work to be done to make it happen happens. So that's my motion. I mean.
All right. So just for clarity, would you repeat your motion, please?
As part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, along with the proposed findings and recommendations. It's in the chat box, if anyone wants to read along.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Discussion. Have we had enough discussion? All right. I see no further discussion.
Chantal has her hand up.
I really don't know how to make that any clearer.
Well, you usually have your hand up over here.
I'm sorry. I thought we weren't interrupting. Was that a thing? Tara, do we need to put in there, since you have the proposed findings and recommendations, do we need to also clarify the complaint? So it's the complaint, the investigative file, just so there's no confusion in the future? Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted now.
There I go. I start chewing ice and I think mute, so that you all don't hear it. And then I forget that I put it on mute. Okay. If we say as part of its review, the full investigation file shall be made available to the board for its review, subject to the limitations on access and confidentiality set forth in Article 7 below, along with the complaint, the proposed findings and recommendations.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Armijo Pruitt. So when is this supposed to happen?
Well, it looks like it was already supposed to be happening from what I can tell from the policy. So I don't know. I mean, that would be at your best effort to make it happen as soon as possible. I mean, we can put it in there immediately.
Not my question. My question is, what's going to trigger this request?
So what this says is nothing triggers a request. This is part of the process.
When the investigation is complete, or when the
At
case.
the point when we are asked to review the complaint and the findings letter, and those things are made available to us, this would also be made available to us. Right? So it's like at the point when we are told, here are the cases that you need to review and be ready to vote on the findings for when you come to the next meeting, at that point, we should also have that information.
So in other words, when it appears on the agenda, then an individual board member can contact the agency and say, I want to see this investigation file.
No, it would be what this is saying is it will be made available to us as a matter of course. Remember when you asked, what did I want? And I said, yes, that's exactly what I want. It's that as those things are made available to us as a matter of standard operating procedure, the complaint and the findings letter as it is now would also have the investigative file made available.
So we're going to be posting every investigation file as the investigation is completed.
Sounds right.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm opposed to this. I think that the board already is positioned in that it's overworked. And in my opinion, the focus of the board is completely misguided in this area. And my smoke and mirrors, as described before, when describing that the members of the board have no idea what took place with the Albuquerque Police Department last week with its stakeholders meetings and its purview of what they're supposed to be doing with the Albuquerque Police Department, along with reviewing officer-involved shootings and serious use of force cases, and now reviewing every individual investigation that comes before it. I don't think that that's practical.
Member Mia Pruitt.
I would counter that if we're ill-informed on the things that are on the agenda for you to present and give us updates on, that is, I'm not sure what to say about that. So if as you brought up the list of things that you feel like we're ill-informed about, I would beseech you to help us be better informed in the future.
Chair Dr. Cass, Member Mia Pruitt, it's not ill-informed, it's uninformed in that there's no participation in those meetings by board members.
So, Member Galloway.
Meetings that take place at a specific time are sometimes not easily joinable. It's not always the easiest. I know that sometimes this gets lost, but this is your job. And this is our volunteer time that we do outside of our job. So we can fit in these cases as best we can at 11 o'clock at night, not when there's an amici meeting going on at 9:30 during our business hour. So I think that's an important thing to note. I would also remind you that we are talking about for this last quarter, we're talking like 7 cases. This is not going to be that much extra time for us. I know that this is a fluke right now, and we may be sorry that we've done this down the line, but right now is a really good time for us to get in the groove and get in the process of reviewing the cases that you guys have asked us to do for at least a year. I would be willing to bet it was longer than that. So now you have a board who is actually wanting collectively to do the things that you have asked us to do. It's not even just an audit function of the case review committee. We are all asking for this to be made available to us. It seems like it ought to be a win-win.
Any other, I'm sorry, Member Olivas.
I really want to support this, but I'm not sure that I don't know how we get to a place where this isn't a tremendous burden on the agency, who we are trying to advocate for so that they can meet their deadlines. And, you know, I agree with Member Armijo Pruitt that the technology excuse may be just that, an excuse, but I don't think we have a full understanding of what it could entail here, and what we could be asking for or imposing on the agency. I'm really conflicted about this. I really don't know how I'm going to vote, because I really see that there's an issue here, but at the same time, I think that we need to. I wish that we had a partner at the agency that was talking to us about how we can get this done in a way that doesn't decimate the agency, rather than saying, no, we can't do it, which clearly I think we've established, based on our reading and our legal counsel's reading of the ordinance and our own policies and procedures, we have the authority to ask for this for every case. I'm not sure that that's a good idea, but it sounds like because we don't have cooperation from the agency at this point, that's where we're going to go. And that's very concerning to me, because we're not partnering here, and you know, I think we need a partner, and I just don't see it. So I appreciate both sides of what's happening here, and this is a tough one.
Member Nixon.
I think this is exactly where we need to go, and this is exactly what we need to ask for. I think that there are some evolutions that need to take place in this process, and this is one of those. I don't see anything technologically that is going to hamper in any way, shape, or form having files, and whether they're documents or files or camera videos moved around in processes that we already have available to us. I'm not buying that. I think that this is very doable at this point, and I think that we are also a flexible enough board to where if the agency does run into some sort of issues or problems with being able to fulfill this, then we can talk about it at that time. But I think it's absolutely necessary that we vote on this and pass this through so that we can get to the next phase and become more efficient. I'm sorry, there's no excuse for not having this. Thank you.
Member Armijo Pruitt.
I do not want to hamper the agency or tie up their resources, but I do feel like I routinely ask for things and other members ask for things, and we are told no. No, that it's in your rules, you can't do it. No, you voted on this in the past, that you don't address these cases. No, no, no. And then if I stop and say, okay, let's investigate that. Let's see where that's at. It turns out it wasn't actually supposed to be that. It was, no, I don't want to do it. And so that's why it feels to me like we have to put this here now, especially while we're having few cases that are coming in front of us, to give us a chance to work this out. Because the answer per policy doesn't need to be no. But if we don't put it in here, the answer is always no. And so I think, you know, I would want to be flexible. I would want to be reactive to the needs of the agency going forward. But I want the agency to also look at us in that same way and try and facilitate what we're trying to accomplish here. And I feel like that maybe the only way that's going to happen is if we put it in policy and then we're forced to find a solution.
And how does this further the mission of the board?
Well, it says in our procedures that we are to review these cases and the investigative file is supposed to be made available to us. So that looks to me like both the ordinance and our policies say the exact same thing, then that's part of what we need to be doing.
Yes,
and if there's other domains in which you would like to see the board more active or more built out, I think I'm all for backing you on that. I'm all for myself getting more involved. I'm all for creating some other function within a different subcommittee that maybe takes on direct things you think we should be more involved in. Absolutely. But that's not what we're voting on right now.
Member Galloway.
I would also note that as part of the findings of the audit, where we only investigated or we only audited 2 cases. We came out of that with a policy recommendation to be sent to the Policy and Procedure Committee. So that 51% of our time came from a review of this, of the materials that we're asking for now. So I think that's how it furthers the mission of this board.
Member Olivas, you have your hand up?
Nope, I'm done.
Okay. Your blue hand is up. Is there any further discussion on this, on the motion on the floor? We did have a second, is that right? All right, so seeing no further discussion, I'll call for a roll call vote in favor of the motion that's presented by Member Armijo Pruitt. Member Armijo Pruitt.
Yes.
Member Galloway.
Yes.
Member Mitchell.
I'm going to vote no based on I think it should be upon request. And I also think the adage of be careful of what you're asking for, you may get it, is going to apply in this situation.
Member Nixon.
Yes.
Member Olivas.
Yes.
And the chair votes no. So the motion carried 4-2. So this is another item that will be given to the council for incorporation in the policies and procedures.